Okay, so Boas argued for this concept of historical particularism, in which he dismissed the idea that biology really had any important impact on humans being capable of being civilized, right? Again, he argued the fact that if he were to go live with the Inuit in the Arctic, that they were perfectly situated within their environment for their culture to flourish and to be sustainable and to be successful, right? And they didn't need all of the technology or the what we would consider to be like sophisticated culture. That wasn't necessary for them to be successful as their own culture. So they adapted to their circumstances and developed from there. Now, Malinowski had a slightly different concept in which, again, dealing with sort of the same sort of idea that culture wasn't relegated to biology, rather that culture was sort of functioned like biology, right? So he would look at structural functionalism, right? So if you were to take, say, a human and you were to look at all their individual organs and how each one of those organs perform a specific duty to maintain a living body, right? Your heart does this, your lungs do these, your kidneys do that, your intestinal tract does this, right? Your skin performs a function, your eyeballs do this. He looked at a culture like that, right? How each function works together to create all the things that culture needs. And again, would not necessarily compare them to other cultures, okay? Because they might not be the same. So he would incorporate all those things like kinship and politics and economics and religion and all of those things as different organs within that cultural body. Though there were problems with some of this, right? So with both of these, and many other anthropologists who came shortly after them, they oftentimes looked at culture as being static, right? So if you were to go out and research the Inuit, they would be the Inuit and have been the Inuit all along and will continue to be the Inuit in the future, without taking into consideration that cultural change takes place. And all depends on the influence of that culture change, right? Of like how much culture is coming in. So if you have, again, small culture that is relatively isolated, you might not see a lot of cultural change take place, but it will over time. So that is something that has to be taken into consideration. More contemporary ideas look at how there are many more influences coming in to these cultures, right? And it all depends on the circumstances, right? Things change, things happen, and things are never static. So then we have the interpretist approach, and Clifford Geertz describes this approach as a way to explore culture and their symbolic systems. An example would be, what is a wink, right? If I wink at you, what does that mean? Now, it can be interpreted a bunch of different ways. So I can wink at you and say, hey, how you doing, right? All right. Or I could wink at you in a conspiratorial way, like, yeah, I know what you're doing. I see what's going on. You know, I could wink at you and say, oh, I've got something in my eye, right? And there's different ways of looking at a particular type of behavior given context, right? And it all comes down to that context in which that wink is given. So we can do that and look at the specific actions of a particular culture and try and understand why those particular things are really important to know. One of the things that Gertz goes into is what we call the thick description, and that is taking one particular aspect of a culture and doing sort of like a deep dive into it. And this is particularly important when we start talking about your paper, right? Your project that's due at the end of the semester. This is almost kind of what I want you to do, is sort of like a thick description about that particular culture. So pay attention. So for example, let's take football, right, as an example. Does football have a culture, right? How does football fit into our culture? So yes, it does have its own culture, but does it have the same sort of culture that we would normally think? It actually, there's a lot of things that it sort of fits in to our own culture, right? So let's talk about those things. There's identity that each team creates for itself. So you might have the Broncos have their own culture and their own history and their relationship with the Raiders, and the Raiders distinctly have their own culture. And then you have the Steelers or the Patriots or the Cowboys, right? They're all playing the same game, but they are situated in different geographical locations, and the people are going to behave differently in those areas, and they create historical identities for themselves, right? So they have that. Then it's how those teams interact, creating rivalries between each other, right? The Broncos and the Raiders have had this long-standing rivalry, and the Broncos and the Chiefs, and we play up those rivalries, right? Because we like those rivalries. Are the rivalries the same as they were 20, 30, 40 years ago? No, because those same players aren't playing the game. They're not having the same interactions. But the fans continue those rivalries, right? Why is it that people get into bar fights? Because, your team won and my team lost, and I get angry about it, and then I get into a fight about it. It's just a game, right? Well, not quite, right? Because a lot of times we also associate our own identities connected to these teams. We put value into them, and when things are challenged, things become difficult because someone else says something about your team. We can look at European soccer as being just like whoa, what is going on here? Like whole stadiums rioting over their soccer team, football team, whatever, same thing. Anyway, right? But then it comes down to things like ritual. Okay, so when we think about football, we also think about going to stadiums and experiencing the game in person. Or more likely what you'll do is you'll have maybe you'll have a Sunday party at your house, right? And football, you got family and friends, they come over and they all watch the game, and people bring food, right? They bring food. Every week, somebody's bringing snacks, somebody's bringing barbecue or something along that line, and they're, adding into the stuff. And then all of a sudden you start connecting experiences, right? You're talking to your father-in-law and starts talking about a game that you guys experienced 10 years ago. Oh, I remember that game. Or what about that Super Bowl that happened? Oh, that was such a travesty. But you have now associated yourself with all of these things, right? This historical events that you, again, invested time and effort with your friends and your family over this game, right? But that's look deeper. So you've got that Sunday game, right? People are bringing food. They spend time together. It becomes a ritual event that goes on year after year after year, and you start thinking about the people who no longer show up, right? Because they've passed away. And you think about them, and you think about all the good times and the bad times, right? So you have those connections of experience. But then it goes even further, right? It's now the separation from the daily grind. This is something that is supposed to be something to relax, right? It's recreation, right? You might watch the game and then you might go outside and say like, hey, yeah, let's go throw the ball. Let's go play some football. Let's, play some catch. Maybe you want to collect memorabilia, right? So you're going to spend money and it's going to become an economic force. And you're going to collect things over the years to add to your identity as being this fan of this franchise, right? It can change the mood of an individual or even a city, right? I mean, anytime that you have a championship team, right, everybody just gets excited. You watch the parades and the people, and they're happy. And there is evidence that every time that you win a championship, like the crime goes down, right? Because people are happy, and things are going good, and everyone's attitude and their moods are just improved upon. And if you lose, right, same thing happens. People idolize, right? When I was a kid, Carl Mecklenburg for the Broncos was like my idol. I was just like, I loved him, and John Elway, right? Elway was like, oh yeah, this great, athlete, and wanted to play him. I wanted to have a jersey. I wanted to have pictures and autographs and stuff like that. And they become hugely important influences on the youth, right? If we think about the impact that football has had in the United States, right? How many high school teams have a football team? How many college teams have a football team, right? If you think about how many people actually become a member of the professional football team, it's like getting struck by lightning, right? You've got like almost the same chance of getting struck by lightning than as to get on a professional football team. But a lot of people strive for that. They want to be able to do that. They want to be that athlete. They want to have those opportunities that you could get. So it has a huge influence on kids, right? And that can have different kinds of impacts, right? You get kids that hurt. They get hurt while playing football and can have catastrophic consequences. Or you have players that get hurt, right? It's a physical activity. It's a sport, right? So we look at the medical side of it, and how has, if we look at the NFL and look at, say, like how they've changed their helmets, how they've changed safety, how they've changed the rules for the game to make it safer for players, because they're flying around. They're these super athletes that are flying around at incredible speeds, hitting each other as hard as they possibly can. Guess what? People are going to get hurt. So then the technology is going to be impacted. So people are now out there doing research on on pads and on helmets and the impact of concussions, right? And then we have things like kneeling, right? Colin Kaepernick, who kneeled during as a protest during the national anthem. And that has cultural importance as well, and created this this debate, this spark, which has lasted for years. So when we think about a subject like football, right, and we oftentimes just think about it as just a game, it actually has these deep-rooted connections that go off in all these different ways to influence us in understanding how a culture might work, right? We can see the surface level, but if we want to understand that culture better, we need to do that thick description and try and understand that, that community better. Okay, that's it for now. We'll finish this up in our